Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Switch Statement Podcast. It's a podcast for investigations into miscellaneous tech topics.
This is our second episode on Gödel, Escher, Bach by Douglas Hofstadter.
Hey, John. How are you doing?
Hey, Matt. How are you?
I am doing all right. I've got my abstraction helmet on. I'm ready to just dive in heads first into the punishing world that is Gödel's theory of incompleteness.
Yeah, man, this theorem beats me up. As many times as I read it, I still don't understand it. Like, I think my brain is just not smart enough to understand this.
Well, luckily, or maybe unluckily, Hofstadter threatens to explain it in a tremendous amount of detail later in the book. So this is only going to be. I mean, we're gonna keep on strangely looping back to this point, throughout this series. So this is just going to be a little just a gentle introduction to this concept, I suppose.
So gentle, but it feels like it just punched me in the face.
Yeah, I think we just need to get used to that. But
getting punched in the face, yeah.
So I think we kind of start off with basically the core, what I think is kind of the core of all these paradoxes. I think they all kind of boil down to this statement is false with more steps,
Yeah.
And he calls this the Epimenides paradox, which that's one of those words that I read and I don't ever figure out how you actually are supposed to say it.
Yeah, I'm like, is it Epimenides? I mean,
I could see that.
No, I like the way you pronounced it. So this statement is false. So it's the type of statement where if it is false, then that makes the statement itself true, which is obviously a paradox. If the statement is true, then what it's saying can't possibly be true. So anyway, it's just a statement that doesn't function like normal.
Yeah, it makes a claim about its own truth value.
Yeah.
In such a way that it's actually it would always contradict whatever assignment of truth. Basically, it's like this statement contradicts with itself.
Yes.
And yeah, so and again, this self-reference, which we're going to keep on getting back to, is kind of at the heart of Gödel's theory of incompleteness.
Yeah. And there is, I'm sure we're going to discuss a trillion examples of this very similar construction, he calls them. But there's a very similar one that I also like called Russell's paradox. And this one is a little bit more abstract because it's in set theory. But I think it's to the point where a normal human being can still understand it. But Russell's paradox is basically he describes it as most sets don't contain themselves. You think of the set of all gorillas. The set of all gorillas doesn't contain the set of all gorillas because set is this abstract mathematical concept. It's not a gorilla. Therefore, that set does not contain itself. Some sets do contain themselves, like the set of all things except gorillas. So that set actually has its own self in it because it is not a gorilla. Therefore, it is in itself. But if you think of a set of all sets that don't contain themselves, that set does contain itself, but its very definition is that it shouldn't contain itself because it's the set of all things that don't contain themselves. So I don't know if I explained that very well, but that feels like a very, it's a very mathy version of the same Epimenides or Epimenides paradox. But I sort of like that one because I can still sort of understand it, and there's almost like a visual or physical way of understanding it.
Yes and no, though, because containing, because obviously in the physical world something can't contain itself.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think it just gets into this because I view all of these things as like almost like linguistic puzzles where, reality is governed by the laws of physics, and the laws of physics can't be broken. And so you can't create some construction in reality that like is a paradox. But obviously when you start creating representations, or, if you start getting into like the written word, then the rules in that realm are they're very arbitrary. They're not, it's not like the laws of physics where you can't possibly break them. Like you can just write a sentence that breaks them. And so I've always viewed all of these things as sort of fitting into that category where it's like, it's just that you've devised a system that enables you to express something that like breaks the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I actually, let me take one step back, because he kicks off this section with a sentiment that I really like. And this really resonates with me. He says something to the effect that like, we have become more used to jankiness in science.
Yeah.
Where like in the modern age, we have like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, we have like a probabilistic understanding of reality. There's all these experiments like the slit,
double slit. Yeah.
The double slit experiment, where it's like the results are just very contradictory and weird. And I think we've sort of gotten more used to like the reality just being strange and like hard to describe in some ways. So I think we're less concerned about these like hyper formal systems that have to be able to like, represent the entirety of reality and never break. But during this time in history, the thinking was very different. Everyone wanted these very formal systems where, all truth could be represented, and it was impossible to break. And it was complete, meaning, completeness, meaning it could fully represent reality. But that's just not the case. You just can't do that.
And this is, you brought up the Russell paradox. Bertrand Russell, and I forget Whitehead's first name. And I think we've talked about Principia Mathematica before, maybe not. This was this was an exercise. I mean, this was a saga, apparently, in trying to come up with this system, a formal system that allows you to prove everything that is true in mathematics. And the way he got around, so the way he solved Russell's paradox was you're only allowed, like there's basically a hierarchy of sets where the base set is only allowed to contain things that are not sets or objects. And then the next level of sets is only allowed to contain the base level of sets or objects. So, and then you now you break this self-reference because it's not even allowed, like it's not a valid set.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think this is going to be another strong theme in this book, which is that Russell and Whitehead sort of broke reality into tiers.
Yeah.
Where, this lowest tier is these super simple statements, like the set of all gorillas. That's like a relatively simple statement. It's sort of easy to understand. Then you have maybe this higher order thing, like, I don't know, like the set of all things that aren't gorillas, which is like a little bit more abstract and weird. And in this way of presenting these tiers, you've sort of given yourself an out.
Yeah.
You've sort of said like, oh, you've constructed an invalid thing. Well, that's just in a higher tier, and we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah. The challenge for Gödel becomes how do I get create a loop? Russell and Whitehead have attempted to forbid these circular references, and this is ultimately what. This is kind of the core of what Gödel does, is he is able to create and correct me if you have a different understanding, but basically he's able to create a claim and represent it as a number, thereby putting it at the bottom of the hierarchy. It's like
Yes.
you have, and this is kind of where the loop comes in, where comes up with these translations from logical statements to numbers.
Right.
And then and then that's where the loop comes in. It's like, okay, once you can translate logical statements to numbers, then all the other rules apply.
Yeah.
And so that means that, like, and this is where I think my understanding starts to break down, is like, what does the fact that you've represented a claim as a number, how does that allow you to break the possibility of completeness? Like, it's still not clear to me.
Yeah, no, and this is like extremely difficult for me to understand. I mean, I don't understand it, but yeah, I think everything you're saying was accurate. Like, Gödel's whole thing is he basically proved that this whole tier system doesn't work, because you can take these impossible expressions and express them in those lower tiers. Like, he's basically saying you can convert between tiers and the example he does is he converts all statements into numbers, which means that, they exist in this low tier, just like you're saying. I'm like repeating what you just said.
Is a number an object in this system? I just want to, like, make sure I'm understanding. So a set can contain numbers. Is that correct?
I think so. I mean, I'm not going to be, I don't really know the answer, but I think so. I think that's the point, is like, numbers are these elementary building blocks. And so what Gödel is saying is, like, you can take this statement is false, and you can represent it in whatever fundamental building block that your formal system has. And therefore, there's no formal system that can possibly represent all truth. There's no such thing as a quote unquote complete formal system, because this incompleteness will. Yeah.
And this is the crazy claim that this book is making, is Gödel's theory of incompleteness. Like, it doesn't just break Principia Mathematica, it manages to prove that there cannot exist a system of, I don't know what it is, like a logical system such that everything that is true is provable.
Yes. Yeah, so it's basically, that whole era that I was just describing, where the entire math world was sort of working towards this fully defining or having a formal system that could be able to fully define reality for the rest of time, which would have been this, huge discovery. And this is what Russell and Whitehead were like trying to do. That's what the Principia Mathematica was trying to show. It was like, hey, here's a formal system that actually does it. Gödel came down with a complete atom bomb and just annihilated that whole way of thinking. He sort of owned Russell and Whitehead. Like, they had this whole book, but he was like, nah. He dropped Mike on them and like made them look like jerks, and basically showed that whole way of thinking was a dead end. It's like, we got to move on, guys. Like, incompleteness exists. Just forget about it.
Which, in a way, I mean, it's kind of a blessing, to be shown that it's not possible, so you can just spend your time doing something else.
Yeah. And incompleteness, I don't fully understand this relationship, but there's actually, like, one complaint I've heard about incompleteness is like, yeah, but where does this actually manifest itself? Like, in a way that actually affects humanity? Like, it just seems like this hyper abstract thing, and it is. But there's a few manifestations of it that are a little bit more practical, I would say. And one of them is the halting problem, which is something that Turing introduced, that basically says, given a program, like a computer program, and its input, you can't prove whether the program will continue running forever or will stop at some point. And this is actually like an important fundamental principle in software engineering. So it's kind of a tie over that is a little bit more real, I would say.
I think this ties so much to programming, and especially like recursion and this is going to come back a ton, I'm sure. And he even starts to he introduces computers. But actually, before we get onto that, there was this point, this claim that he made, which I wanted to look for the exact wording. It was something to the effect of that provability is weaker than truth, essentially. That it's like, or rather, the set of things that are provable is a strict subset of the things that are true in any logical system.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. That seems like the coolest formulation of what Gödel's theory of incomplete is.
Yes.
Proving.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up.
Because that's the thing. It's like the statement is ultimately true. The statement, and I don't think we said it. The statement that Gödel translates into numbers is this statement of number theory does not have any proof in the system of Principia Mathematica. So it's not that it's slightly different than the like oscillating nature of this statement is false. It's just true, but it forbids its own proof.
Yeah.
Which I think that is, in a lot of ways, I think that makes it a more interesting statement because it feels like it's doing real work.
Right. Yeah, it's basically saying that there will always be these nooks and crannies of math that will kind of be unapproachable. Like you're not going to be able to create a system that will be able to encapsulate those things. So it's a super interesting side effect of incompleteness.
Yeah. But yeah, so at the end of this, he starts to talk about computers and Babbage. Actually, a former topic of show and tell.
I love Babbage, and he throws out a factoid about Babbage that I'd never heard that I totally loved. Apparently, during Babbage's day, there was these organ grinder guys, basically these guys that would, they'd sit there with their little organ where you turn the crank and it like plays a song, and they would. I guess they were like panhandlers, basically, like trying to get coins from people. And apparently Babbage would like run these guys out of town because they were like infuriating him, which I don't know. It seemed so Babbage to me because I just see Babbage as this like curmudgeonly old man.
Yeah, just this grump. But so he very quickly kind of pivots towards machine intelligence.
Yes.
And
he mentions Ada Lovelace.
Oh yeah. He definitely talks about Ada Lovelace and yeah, she. I don't know. Did we want to talk about her?
I mentioned her because she was one of the first people, if not the first person, to sort of realize that with these algorithms, these logical sequences of statements, you can do anything. Like she was one of the first people to realize that the implications of that go way beyond logic, way beyond math. And I think that that's just such a huge, huge mental breakthrough.
Yeah. Well, my understanding is she is considered the first programmer. Like Babbage he thought of it as being able to be used for like math, but she came up that you could like actually sequence like these programs together or something like I don't know. That's my rough understanding.
Oh yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And it's, if you think about it, like that breakthrough is our whole entire modern world is kind of based on that breakthrough and that sort of extension of these logical sequences of statements. So I don't know. That's one of I really love Ada Lovelace, and that's one of the reasons I think she's like a pretty cool figure in computer science.
Oh yeah, they should. Are there TV series that follow her life? I feel like they should have that.
They should, because she also just has like a very interesting life. Like her dad was Lord Byron, the famous poet who was like running all over Europe, like having sex with everyone. And she had kind of an interesting upbringing. Like she had a very solitary childhood. She was sick for long periods of her early life, so she was kind of by herself. I just listened to a podcast where they talked about how she had a project where she was trying to duplicate birds' wings except for human size.
Ooh, nice.
I guess she was like reaching out to these anatomists who could like describe bird wing anatomy to her. It's like she's like this 14-year-old girl like doing these things, and it's just very cool.
Dude, so you can't say who's gonna catch that itch where you're just like trying to solve problems. Like, it would be so cool to fly, and she's just like, all right, let's just go about figuring it out.
Yeah. Yeah, she had sort of the courage, sort of an out of box thinking that I just think is so cool. Where, just like you're saying, it's like, some goal that seems completely impossible. She's like, oh yeah, I'm just going to like give it the old college try. Going to reach out to a bird anatomist and try to duplicate bird wings.
But yeah, so moving on from Ada Lovelace, he talks about what a machine would need. He's saying that these would all be necessary, but maybe not sufficient per se to have an intelligent machine. And man, it feels like we are already checking all of these boxes.
Oh yeah.
Respond. Yeah, so it says respond to situations very flexibly, take advantage of fortuitous circumstances. That's actually an interesting one because I feel like I'm not sure that we want a machine that's taking advantage of fortuitous circumstances.
Yeah.
Make sense out of ambiguous or contradictory messages. Recognize the relative importance of different elements of a situation. Find similarities between situations. So, I mean, there's a bunch of them, but like, synthesize new concepts by taking old concepts and putting them together in new ways, and then come up with ideas which are novel. Like, I think ChatGPT is doing all of those things today.
Yeah. Yeah, it sure is. I mean, I wonder, Douglas Hofstadter is going to have to write a new foreword for this book soon. Yeah. Because, he even has chapters on like AI, and I'm very curious to read those chapters and sort of, what the level of thinking would have been back when he originally wrote this book, because we've come a long way.
Yeah. And just how he sees, is this a consciousness? Because he has already kind of criticized the concept that there's something special about human intelligence. Like, is there something different at the physical layer with our brains? Like, no. And he kind of says there's no reason. And he talks about this, like logical systems can convey a certain sort of like self-awareness. Why can't a machine? So I think he would probably be of the side that like, actually it is, ChatGPT is approaching general intelligence.
Yeah, no, I agree. If not, surpassing it in a lot of ways, or at least surpassing humans' abilities. He mentions a couple other things in this chapter that I really liked. One thing he talks about is how, like you were saying earlier, mathematicians tried to move on to systems where like these types of contradictions just couldn't exist. But he mentions that having these types of contradictions and sort of holding them together in one, sort of in your brain is at the core of intelligence. Like being able to deal with this type of nuance where like, okay, these things don't sort of fit perfectly together, but maybe I can make practical use of them. Being able to think of all of these rules and meta rules and all of these different layers of reasoning about a system, like those are all absolutely essential to understanding reality. And I found that to be very interesting. So it's almost like if we were to have a system that basically didn't go into this metaphysical space, like we'd only be able to get so much mileage out of that system, because
we wouldn't exist.
Exactly.
But I maybe this is like hubris, but I feel like the solution to the like paradoxes of these like truth statement assignments is kind of like, it's just like you think about and I'm coming from the computer science background, but it's like you just kind of trace it through time. Like you add this element of like iteration of evaluation, and it's like it feels like, oh, like it doesn't have a valid truth assignment, and it's like technically that's true, but it's actually, you can kind of think of it as just like this infinite, and this is kind of like a halting problem thing where it's like you think of it like a computer program, and its truth assignment is actually this, it's this infinite evaluation that's just oscillating back and forth.
Yeah.
And that actually is its truth assignment.
Right. Yeah.
And if you allow the progression of some semblance of time, maybe it's like, logical ticks, then it stops feeling as like paradoxical, and it more just feels like, when you allow that like time dimension, that it's just like, yeah, most things you evaluate them, and then in one time step they have a value. But
Yes.
sometimes you evaluate them, and then and then like in a recursive function, like that's one where it's referring to itself multiple times, but it stops at a certain point.
Yes, yeah. This is why I think that sort of connection to programming is so fundamental to this book. Because, if you think of these mathematical statements as like a logical sequence of statements that are evaluated in order, where that evaluation just sort of like has a go-to in it and it goes to an earlier part of the statement. Like, I think that's actually a really cool way to think about this and kind of demystifies it a little bit.
Right. So, but yeah, I don't think I had anything else. Did you have any other thoughts about this chapter?
No, that was all I had. I'm simultaneously excited about this book, but also terrified by it, because I think there's going to be a lot of things that will be very difficult for me to like talk about.
Oh yeah.
But I think it will be fascinating. Like, this first chapter was really interesting, and it felt like it was just scratching the surface. Like, it felt like he was intentionally pulling his punches. So I'm very excited to get deeper into this.
100%. Yeah. No. Well, let's I don't know, dive in next week for chapter 2. And what is this? The Mu puzzle.
Oh yeah, the Mu puzzle. All right, Matt. I'll see you next time.
All right. See you next time.